Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida Fair Tax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, June 21st, 2024. Linder's Letter. John Linder, a retired member of Congress, is the original sponsor of the fair tax and is on the AFFT Advisory Board. John has written a letter to President Trump about how to fundamentally change D.C. He should replace the income payroll tax system with the fair tax. John's advice applies equally to President Biden or any other politician who really wants to help Americans. Here's John's letter. Dear President Trump, Trump derangement syndrome is a direct result of your success in disrupting the established order. The single most powerful way to finish that job on the D.C. establishment is to destroy its ability to reward and punish with the tax code. The fair tax does that. The IRS was weaponized early in the Obama administration, and no one ever paid a price. IRS emails were destroyed, Lois Lerner was found in contempt of Congress, and the issue just went away. The recent doubling of the IRS budget is an effort to make it the primary weapon against middle-class America. History has shown us that once Democrats get another big spending program passed, Republicans never get it removed. Republicans have a sad history of just accepting Democrat programs and only trying to reduce the cost. Let me give you an example of Republican failure. Immediately after the passage of Obamacare, Steve King placed at the desk a motion to discharge a bill to repeal Obamacare. If we got 218 signatures, the bill would go directly to the floor for a vote. I agreed and I signed it. Our leaders, though, urged Republicans not to sign it. They said that a lot of our constituents like the provision that allows our children up to the age of 26 to stay on our policies, and we don't want to anger them. That's why we fail. We just cave. The establishment fears you because they believe you will destroy what is working, at least for them. That disruption must be completed. The most final and complete disruption of the establishment and the deep state would be accomplished by passing the fair tax and abolishing the IRS. It has been estimated that more than half of K Street makes its living gaming the tax code. Get rid of that tax code and half of K Street goes away. Let me give you two examples that may not spring to mind. The realtors in my district love the fair tax because, with no income taxes, the huge increase in people's take-home pay would make it easier for them to pay the mortgage. However, the National Association of Realtors hates the fair tax because they were organized to protect the mortgage interest deduction. Now, if we eliminate the income tax, then there's no deduction. And what are they to do? The same can be said for the Farm Bureau. Their 5 million family members love the fair tax because it eliminates the death tax. Their bureaucrats are not so sure. They were organized to get rid of the death tax, and if we actually do that, then what are they to do? The same argument obtains from one end of K Street to the other, AICPA, Retail Federation, and all across Washington, D.C. We know that bold action is necessary to rebuild our economy and bring jobs back to the United States. The fair tax does that and more. So, what else will happen? 1. The economy will explode. Trillions of dollars offshore will be repatriated because there will be no tax event in doing so. I once asked Alan Greenspan how long it would take for that money to be in our markets and banks if we passed the fair tax. He said months. A study shows that capital spending in the first year after passing the fair tax will increase by 70%. That increases productivity and is estimated that the GDP will grow in the first year by 10%. That begins to save Social Security and Medicare. Additionally, the ceiling on contributions to those programs disappears, and we include illegal immigrants and the underground economy. 2. Manufacturing will return to the United States. Former Ways and Means Committee Chairman Bill Archer often quoted an informal study of a large number of international businesses that are headquartered overseas. When asked what they would do in their long-term planning if we eliminated all taxes on capital and labor and taxed only personal consumption, 80% of them said they would build their next plant in the United States, but 20% said they would relocate their headquarters to the United States. I discussed this with George W. Bush in the Oval Office, and he grasped it immediately. And it's totally border neutral, which will improve our exports as well as make us more competitive with imports whose taxes have been rebated. 3. With the prebate, the poor will be totally untaxed and consumer prices will fall dramatically. A Harvard study determined that the embedded cost of the IRS at retail is 22% of the price. For example, it takes hundreds of companies to bring a loaf of bread to your table. Oil companies get oil, refineries refine it for the tractors and trucks. Ore companies get ore to sell to steel companies to sell to tractor and truck manufacturers who sell them to distributors. Farmers and grain companies and bakeries and plastic companies and distribution companies and retail stores are all involved as well. Each of them has labor costs and operating costs and rent and tax costs. The only mechanism available for any business to pay a bill is price. And the only taxpayer in the world is the consumer who consumes the product and all of the embedded costs therein. Let's quit lying to the public. Stop pretending that businesses pay taxes and tax the consumer honestly and openly. The prebate only goes to legal residents. 4. We will, for the first time ever, tax wealth instead of wages. For those worried that the rich won't pay their fair share, I note that all wealth is ultimately consumed, if not by the earner, then by the heirs. Even money contributed to charities is ultimately consumed and will be taxed. And if Elon Musk wants to move to a farm and grow his groceries and never pay taxes, we won't care. We will borrow his money and create jobs with it. 5. Businesses will make business decisions based on what is best for their shareholders, employees, and customers, not what is best for their tax burden. 6. We will tax the underground economy, which 15 years ago was estimated at $3 trillion a year. Illegal immigrants will also pay their fair share of federal taxes. 7. We will save Americans nearly $1 trillion spent each year on IRS paperwork. 8. Churches will be able to conduct themselves as they see fit without IRS agents listening to their sermons. The Johnson Amendment will no longer mean anything. And 9. We will give the American people the greatest gift that's within our power to give: anonymity. No government agency should know more about us than we're willing to tell our children. In 2009, a poll concluded that given a description of taxing income or consumption, the sales tax wins. In 2012, a study was done that concluded that if we were on the fair tax instead of the income tax during the financial crisis, we would have collected 10% more in revenue. If you begin to talk about the fair tax, you will energize millions of people who have been begging for the opportunity to support someone who supports the fair tax. All Republican candidates would have to get in line. Now, this is not a crazy idea. It's been carefully studied and it works. It is exactly the system in place in Monaco, for example. For all the wailing from the left about billionaires paying their fair share, this will make that happen. It's a fact that most billionaires pay a lower tax rate than the average taxpayer. That's because they have tax experts at their disposal and they can lower their tax costs legally and fairly. But they spend more than most of us do, and they will pay more than the rest of us. You'll be told that the fair tax will discourage charitable giving. My parents never earned above the poverty line in their entire lives, yet my mother found a way to contribute to the church every week. She wasn't concerned about tax deductions. Neither were those who gave to real charity. The Fricks, the Mellons, the Carnegies gave away their fortunes before there even was an income tax to deduct from. They built schools, hospitals, and libraries. Most of the recent large commitments to charity by today's billionaires have been to set up personal foundations. Those foundations serve more as political organizations and tax-free public relations operations than in solving the needs of the less fortunate. For example, the Gates Foundation pushed hard for vaccinations across the world for years, while Bill Gates is a major owner of vaccine companies. While Gates has become the largest owner of farmland in the country, his foundation is pushing a plant-based diet to solve global warming. There is very little real charity in these recent charitable foundations. Real charity is found in the fair tax. Now, you'll be told that this is very hard on the poor, but they are totally untaxed. We send a cash advance every month, the prebate, to every legal family based on the size of the family. And yes, you and Melania and Barron will get one as well. It's to totally offset the tax cost of spending for necessities. That's defined each year by the government as the poverty level. Beyond that, we're all voluntary spenders and will be taxed the same. And there is no tax on used items. The fair tax percentage rate is set as an inclusive tax, and that rate is 23% on the personal consumption of all new goods and services. That's to say, it is included in the price as a percent of your total spending. Now, we chose to use an inclusive tax because we are replacing an inclusive income tax. Your income tax is included as a percent of your income. Opponents will argue that it's a 30% tax when compared with a state sales tax, which is on top of your spending, or an exclusive tax. So let's compare it with the income tax when figured the same way. The fair tax is 30% on top of what you have to spend. The average income tax of those who pay income tax is 14.6% plus the payroll tax of 7.65%. That's 22.25%. If you earn $100, you keep $77.75 to spend. That equals a tax on top of what you have left to spend of 29.6%. In other words, the burden is about the same. But with the fair tax, we get dramatically more purchasing power with lower prices, more take-home pay, and the prebate, plus no IRS in our lives. Opponents have also argued that the rate would have to be significantly higher than 23%. They presume the bill will not pass as written. They assume that Congress will exempt items they would like to see exempted, and voila, a higher tax rate is needed. We will argue that exempting anything will open the door to a tax code that's as complicated as the current one. Indeed, we should require a supermajority to exempt anything from the fair tax. As to the politics of the bill, in my primary race in 2002, my view was that if the turnout was a record low, say 30,000 votes, I could lose. The average turnout in a primary in those precincts that compared the new 7th district was 37,000 votes. The record number of votes was 41,700. On election day, we had 88,500 votes, and I won by 30 points. We did a poll 2 days later to find out why so many people voted. 1/4 of the voters had never voted in the Republican primary before. They came out to save the fair tax. Now, 4% were Democrats, and they came for the same reason, and I never ran a commercial on the issue. The fair tax is a winner. In September of 2004, the Democrats got nervous about the issue, and Leader Nancy Pelosi and Budget Leader John Spratt had a 1-hour press conference trashing the fair tax. A month later, Roll Call did a 1,500-word piece on the bill. They used all the Democrat talking points against the bill, but they never called me, the author of the bill, for a comment. The last sentence of that story was a quote by a senior Democrat leadership aide who said, "If the American people catch on to how simple and fair this is, we're toast." Mr. President, this is a big idea. It's also simple and fair. This could change the world. I'm available for a meeting with you or your economic advisors. Let's end the deep state and change the world with just one bill. In Georgia's recent primary election, Republicans added to the ballot a question on whether they supported switching from the state income tax to a state fair tax. Nearly 2/3 voted for the fair tax. Georgia is the most recent of several states that are showing a movement toward ending all taxes on capital and labor and taxing only personal consumption. It's the only honest way to raise government revenue, and the fair tax is their model. My best, John Linder, Georgia District 7, retired. In conclusion, John has done his usual excellent job of explaining why the fair tax is the greatest transfer of power to the people since the U.S. Constitution was ratified. The solution? Pass the fair tax. Now, why would D.C. pass the fair tax and give up an almost unlimited source of donations? Well, they won't, at least not voluntarily. The only way they will is if the rest of us demand it. Isn't it time to end this ludicrous tax collection system and the IRS along with it? Now, there's going to be a vote on the fair tax in the House of Representatives. We now have the opportunity to force all members of the House to show where they stand. They can vote for the President Income Payroll Tax System, or they can vote for the fair tax. They can support the corrupt income tax in the IRS, or they can vote to eliminate it. It can't be any simpler than that. They can continue hiding the true cost of their government, or they can pass the fair tax and show everyone the true cost of government on every retail receipt. And finally, they can support the largest transfer of power from government to the people, the fair tax, or they can vote against it. Now, if members think the fair tax needs to be amended to address a problem, then they can propose the change. Don't let them get away with rejecting the entire bill because it has a perceived flaw that can be easily addressed. And if it's a real flaw, it can be corrected in the final bill. And don't think for an instant there aren't any flaws in the income tax. Help us bring about real tax reform and stop future IRS abuses. By contributing or investing $10.40 a month, you help provide a financial base to Americans for fair taxation. If you can make larger contributions/investments, these will be used not for salaries, as we're all volunteers, but for the needed updates to our economic studies, which will be vital for all future years. Please go to fairtax.org to invest in AFFT and help us pass the fair tax. It's an investment in your and your family's future.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax, and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at fairtax.org.